All right. Morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning.
Hey, Brian, you might want to see if you can get in and edit the spelling of your first name, even though you're smart and all.
And Ryan, while we're at it, there's two Damien Cerniks on this video call today.
I'm Damien today, apparently. Yeah,
Look at
that's random.
I can't say that's going to work out well for you.
that.
Can you hear me there, John?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. We're waiting on a few other subcommittee members here. I think we've pretty much got the staff that we need. Okay, there's Councillor Campbell. Good morning, Barb.
Good morning.
We're just waiting on.
John Skidmore. It's John Skidmore. Hey, how are
Morning.
you?
Doing all right. How are you?
What is this, like second to last day, penultimate day or something?
It's, yeah, there's a few more, but the end is near.
Well, I'm happy to see you. Hello.
Hello. Nice to see you this morning, Barb. So let's see, we've got 3 exciting topics on the agenda today, but let's give Rita another few minutes to see if she is going to join us. Barb or Melanie, I don't know if you've heard from her pro or con, so I'll shoot her a text here.
Okay. Reading the editorial today.
I did not read the editorial today.
We're live on YouTube, just so everyone knows.
All right. In that case, I'll go back to coffee makes the world go round, the world go around.
All right. Let's see. I texted Rita, but it's 9:03. Why don't we kick off the October 27th Community Building Subcommittee? We've got 3 topics on the agenda today. We've got Jason Sir and Ryan Oster, Damien Cernik from our staff will be talking about the CSMP, the continued development of the CSMP, and we have some special guest stars with us as part of the consulting team. We have Andrew Parrish from Angelo Planning Group, and then Margaret Raymond and Beth Goodman from Echo Northwest. Thanks to you for joining us this morning. Second, we will talk a bit about the shelter code amendment. Susanna is here to talk about the survey that is still underway, and that closes, I believe, November 1st. And then third, we have Brian Rankin with us to talk about the implementation of House Bill 3318, which is the DSL property on the east side that will be brought into the UGB. The obligations on the city is to create a concept plan before the end of June of 2022 for that property. It's a pretty big lift. And so Brian wants to talk about some of the specifics of the public outreach and how we're going to try to work through what is really at this point, let's think about it, that's about a 8-month process to get a concept plan for a really big piece of property. So that's a pretty tall order in a pretty quick time frame, and Brian has some good ideas about that. So with that, we have approvals of the minutes from August 25th. I don't know if one of the members of the subcommittee would be willing to make a motion on that.
Move to approve.
I actually had a question about the
Great.
minutes I'm looking at here. And I see on section 5, the sounding board house or neighbors update that we had last time, there's a list of sort of the topics that Susanna covered, but there's no real minutes on our discussion. And I know we had some discussion with some questions and things like that. So,
Melanie, this is Kayla.
hey, Kayla.
With these minutes, they're more action item minutes versus our council minutes that are normally more detailed. If you would like, I can go in and add some more detail to these minutes if you would like.
I just liked how it was in the, Kayla, the one above that said members, when we were talking about the collection system master plan, public involvement, it said members are supportive of this. And then at the end of the number 5, it didn't really say members hated the code, members like, so just a little something more, I think would be great. And if you can amend that, and yeah, then I'd be happy to approve the minutes with that amendment.
Great. So why don't we do this, Kayla? Why don't we put a summary together and we will bring those back. I guess that's going to be the December meeting for approval at that time. Does that work for the subcommittee?
Sounds good.
Great. Okay. Let's see. We have time for public comment. Kayla, I'm going to lean on you. Do we have anybody looking to provide any public comment this morning?
It does look like that we have one caller, Leanne O'Neill. Leanne, I've given you the ability to unmute yourself. You have, you keep it around 2 minutes.
Great, thanks. I'm Leanne O'Neill. I'm with Ben Bikes, and I'm also on the Transportation Bond Oversight Committee. And if this is not the right place for this comment, you can let me know. But I'm commenting on the collection system master plan and wanting some, just to make sure that if this is where the sewer interceptor issues that are kind of intersecting with some of the sequencing of the projects for the GeoBond projects, my comment is really to make sure that the Transportation Bond Oversight Committee is being kept in the loop on the development of that, because there's a lot of interest in some projects that interceptor is going to impact. And in particular, only we've gotten a lot of community comments around wanting to pull only into the first 5 years of the GeoBond. And our understanding is that a lot of that is kind of up in the air based on this master plan. This is not the right place for that, and I've completely misunderstood what that master plan is. Then I'll have been excited to be in this space for less than a minute with all y'all. Thanks.
I think this is completely appropriate forum to raise that concern. So thanks for that. And Ryan Oster, since I see you here, I don't know if you have any suggestions about how we could make sure that there's coordination between those two related efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah, thank you, Leanne. That's a great comment. And yeah, that as Leanne described, the only projects in the bond, we could move forward with those now, but we want to know when the timing of the potential central interceptor is going to be, because we don't want to build only and then tear it up 2 years later. We want to make sure the timing, if there is a central interceptor, is considered when building the only work identified in the bond. So yes, Leanne, we will absolutely will keep TBOC informed of the project of the collection system master plan, and we'll work with you and the rest of TBOC to pencil in the only work and kind of just see how this develops over the next year or so to get more certainty.
Thank you, Ryan.
It looks like we have no more callers.
No more callers? Okay, thank you, Kayla. So with that, why don't we transition into the CSMP conversation? And I'm not so sure who's driving. Looks like Damien is. Thank you. I'll just, we want to put it in presentation mode. Look at that. That's a pro here. Perfect. Well, thanks, folks. So we have a collection of folks here to discuss the continued development of the CSMP. As I mentioned, Jason Sir, Ryan Oster, and Damien Cernick will be here to talk about some of the items we've been working on. And then we have members of our consulting team who will talk through some of the specifics, really looking at the land use inputs of that go into the development of our master plan for that collection system. And I think Leanne raised a good point. And if we think about how some changing things on the horizon might impact our work here, if we think about like the climate friendly and equitable communities goal process in terms of how that kind of reframes our urban planning obligations and approach, that really could have impacts on our inner city infrastructure. And so the CSMP is going to have to take into account what that shift in planning could do to the needs of our collection system. So kind of an opportune time for us to be thinking through these things as legislation and rules hit. So Damien, if you could go to the next slide. I'll just give a little background and just kind of reinforcing what we've done to date. You know, the purpose of the master plans is really to help us grow as a community. And we're in Oregon. It's not a choice of if you want to grow, it's how you're going to grow. And so revisiting our collection system master plan and other master plans routinely helps us keep pace with not only the pace of folks moving to our community, but also a changing political landscape like we've seen with some of the recent legislation, the SL being a good example as well. We wouldn't have expected that a year and a half ago. And then through legislation, we now have some additional inputs that we need to factor into our collection system master plan. I think as a community, I kind of see the 2014 CSMP collection system master plan as a bit of a watershed moment. I think that's when we put together the large sewer infrastructure advisory group together and work through a variety of competing interests. And I think just people's thoughts on how we should really grow. You know, we did decide that we're going to prioritize gravity conveyance. That means that we're not going to be putting in pump stations every so often. Those are very expensive to maintain long term. And we have the ability to really focus on a gravity first system. We decided we were going to stick with one treatment facility. We've got 1,500 acres east of town. The topography works for us well. It gets you know, the sewage from town to the water reclamation facility without a huge amount of pumping costs. We developed a public facilities plan, which would accompany this CSMP as well. And we really tied together the land use assumptions as well as the realities of our collection system needs. I think through that process, I think a lot of the folks in our community realize that our obligation with infrastructure is to plan for growth and not try to use these plans to prevent it. And I think we kind of made it through that conversation where people in our community now realize that, yes, we are in Oregon, we plan for growth. We don't try to, you know, stiff arm it. We use our master planning processes to figure out how we as a community want to grow and accommodate this. And I think that CSMP was really the first step in that evolution. And I think a number of other projects followed with the UGB, the TSB, and others that will come. So with that as a preface, I'm going to hand it over to Jason Sir to walk us through some more of the specifics.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so we kind of talked about this at the August subcommittee meeting, but what is the city's collection system? The city's collection system is comprised of 9 major sewer basins over the 35 square miles within the existing urban growth boundary. As a reminder, the collection system master plan is only allowed to look at servicing properties within the UGB, and so that's what we will be doing with this effort. However, Damien and the team can speak a little bit more to it of how are we actually accounting for employment outside of it versus the properties that reside outside. Additionally, the city's collection system is comprised of about 400 miles of gravity main. These are the gravity mains that John referred to in the previous CSMP. We're really trying to prioritize these. You can kind of think of some of the bigger interceptors of the North Interceptor, Southeast Interceptor, that we are trying to push towards getting those pipes installed, which allow us to take off pump stations, which have a lot of operation and maintenance costs. We do have about 70 miles of force main pipe. That's the pipe on the downstream side of these pump stations. So in comparison, we have 400 miles of gravity and 70 miles of force main. We are working to reduce that number of force main mileage. We do have upwards of 80 pump stations within the city. That is kind of a need of the topography that we do have, but we are also trying to take a better conceptual look at how to service the cities from a collection system standpoint with regional pump stations and those interceptors that do allow us to decommission the smaller residential pump stations. All of the city's wastewater flow does get ultimately conveyed out to the water reclamation facility northeast of town. This is a little bit different than on the water side, where we do have other water purveyors within the city, being Avion and Rotes. The city is the one sewer authority for the urban growth boundary and the city limits. The city does get wastewater flow from all customers. This includes residential, commercial, industrial, and all properties in between. Next slide. Goals of the CSMP. We came back, as I said, we came in August to really present to the community building subcommittee as the advisory board for key project decisions moving forward with the collection system master plan. This is going to be a similar approach to how the SIAG was utilized with the 2014 master plan. This is a smaller scale, but we do think that we have developed those, the framework of the foundation with a one treatment plant and the gravity first conveyance. And so we're just looking to utilize those decisions that have been made. We are here today mainly to talk about the land use assumptions and how to incorporate housing and employment within the city of Bend. And then other goals of the CSMP, as we will get to, are condition assessment of the existing infrastructure. One of the major outcomes is going to be an updated capital improvement list. That's the CIP. That's going to be a 20-year plan for how does the city handling all sewer needs from a conveyance standpoint or a collection standpoint, as well as treatment. And then as part of that CIP development, we will be reviewing the rate strategy. Touching on the schedule real quickly, we are currently in the project planning phase in the fall of 2021. We are looking at initiating a contract in the beginning of 2022. We are targeted to come to City Council for a contract improvement of a CSMP consultant in February. I do want to try and differentiate between the CSMP consultant and the consultants that we have with us today. The consultants, Angelo Planning Group and Echo Northwest, are specifically for land use modeling and those assumptions that we will be discussing today. Whereas the CSMP consultant is the one that's going to be managing and delivering the collection system master plan, the public facility plan, and producing that capital improvement list. So they are different contracts. We have the ultimate goal of getting a CSMP and PFP adopted in the summer of 2023 for the start of the next biennium. And then just touching on public outreach is, Leanne brought up a great point at the start of this, is we do want to get in front of a lot of different committees and boards and make sure that our message is very transparent with everybody, including TVOC. And there are a lot of synergy opportunities for CSMP, TVOC, Water Master Plan, which is up for adoption currently. But yeah, the good point, and definitely noted. So with that, I will turn it over to Damian Cernick, a senior planner with the city.
All right, Jason, thank you very much. Good morning, city councilors. Before getting into the data on land use assumptions, I just want to revisit the process we're going to be using with the community building subcommittee. As Jason mentioned, we presented the idea of using community building subcommittee as our advisory committee for the collection system master plan update at your August meeting. Our purpose for today's meeting is to check in with you on the approach we are going to be taking regarding generating land use assumptions data, primarily looking at how we estimate growth on the remaining land in the urban growth boundary, and including the House Bill 3318 property, so we can then estimate the number of additional housing units, number of jobs by industry, the mix of housing, And we also wanted to use this as a process check-in with the community so that anybody who's listening in understands where we are with our work on the collection system master plan land use inputs. And then at your December meeting, we'll bring back the results of some of the modeling work that Angelo Planning Group will be doing to build out this build out assumption of what growth will look like in the current UGB, and also use that as an opportunity to see if you have any questions or feedback or changes regarding potentially where and what kind of redevelopment may occur. Before I turn it over to the team from Angelo and Echo, I wanted just to touch briefly on really the purpose of developing this land use assumptions data. One of the things you're going to be hearing this morning is that some of the work we're going to be doing will give us a head start on a couple of actions that were identified in the council's goals related to housing, but also with shared prosperity with the update of our economic opportunities analysis. So what we'll be doing with the collection system master plan is modeling out based on our current zoning in the UGB plus the House Bill 3318 property, where development's going to be taking place. We'll try to estimate where redevelopment might be likely to occur. And then with both respect to housing and jobs, looking at the mix of different types of housing, different types of jobs by industry, and really how intense this development might take place. And all this data is necessary so that when we're done, the firm or team of firms that's successful in getting the contract on the collection system master plan update can then use this data for estimating wastewater flows, and then using that data for then looking at the impact on our system to identify whether improvements are needed, upgrades, or new facilities. So at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Andrew Parrish to start with from Angelo Planning Group. Andrew, is there anything you wanted to address on this slide, or shall I go to the next one?
Just stay on this for one moment. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. My firm has been involved in kind of long-range planning for the city of Bend on and off for a number of years here. So we're helping out with the kind of land use side of this plan. I just wanted to note that we're putting together a lot of kind of stacked assumptions about what kind of development might occur, and that's going to go through another layer of assumptions for the CSMP about, okay, what does that generally mean for sewer flows? All of which is to say there's a lot of kind of math and layers of assumptions that go into all of this. So open to any kind of thoughts and discussion about details, but just know that there's as many details as you want to get into, and it goes all the way down. So I'll try to keep things fairly high level here. So let's go to the next slide. Our intent for this is to build on the great history of land use planning in the city of Bend, starting with the collection system master plan, as John talked about, the big urban growth boundary expansion project that was really kind of a reset for the city in terms of getting a new housing needs analysis adopted, getting a new economic opportunities analysis, having a really broad community conversation about what Bend looks like in the future. Since then, we've had the updated public facility plan. We did a transportation system plan update and some specific kind of area plans for some of these expansion areas and the core area for the city. All of which is to say it's really beneficial to have a coherent kind of set of assumptions about growth for the city so that you can use those assumptions in all of these different projects, like the sewer project, the water project, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we're undertaking currently is basically an update of the work that we've kind of has run through all of these projects, looking at what's been built since the urban growth boundary project in 2016, and what does that mean for the remaining capacity of the land in the urban growth boundary. We're just getting kind of a head start on some of those questions for the purpose of sewer planning here. So next slide. Just a little bit of detail about what goes into each of these kind of areas for land use planning for the CSMP. On the housing side, as I said, it's kind of a head start on updating the city's housing capacity analysis. It used to be called the housing needs analysis. They changed the term on us. But that's a inventory of residential land in the city, land that might be used for residences in the future, and a projection of how housing will, of the needed kind of number of units and mix of those units in the future. On the employment side, it's a similar look. What's the land that can accommodate new jobs? How many jobs are we expecting? What's the mix of those jobs? And we're using those inputs to update the land use model, which is basically just a piece of software and spreadsheets that let us kind of tweak assumptions and critique things. And we're trying to put together a plausible version of the build out for the city in 2043 for sewer planning. It won't be exactly how the city looks. Things are going to be different, but we want to kind of look at what these growth projections mean for the city and what that might look like on the ground to use in the sewer planning. And the just to touch on the climate friendly communities process, it is kind of an, as John said, an opportune time, an interesting time to be thinking about that. It might be premature to know exactly how that is going to play into the set of assumptions, but we should definitely have it on our radar. And so we'll probably be talking about that further, Damien and Jason. Okay, next slide. So what are we here for? What do we want the subcommittee's input on? This is trying to explain kind of our process here. So our foundation is the adopted comprehensive plan of the city. It's the adopted development code. And it's state law kind of governing what the sewer system can and can't address. We have our assumed housing growth and assumed employment growth from our kind of early looks at updating those documents. And so right now we're getting into the question of where and how do we accommodate this growth? And that's what we're going to be bringing to you in some detail in December and getting some input on. And then this is going to go off and we're going to plug that into the model, and it's going to wind up with these sewer flow assumptions for Csmp, and that model is also going to be useful for the East DSL property, for other future area plans, for all these other items going forward, if it's kept reasonably up to date. So I wanted to just take a quick pause here and see if there were any kind of clarifying questions before we go into a little bit more detail about kind of housing and employment and where we're at on some of that. Seeing none. Okay, I'll just keep it rolling here. Next slide. So on the housing side, well, I guess just on the geography side, what is the area that we're looking at? I think this has been covered by others previously, but first, just a note, this isn't a land use decision. This is kind of assumptions that are guiding infrastructure planning. So it's not, it doesn't have the same kind of level of findings and rigor that you would need to put together if you were to make an urban growth boundary decision, for example. So we're not there, but we are looking at just assumptions in the city. And so the geography of the area we're looking at is within the currently adopted urban growth boundary and the East Stevens Ranch property, which is highlighted in the map on the right there. This is the bend that we're trying to serve. Next slide. I think I've touched on many of these points already, so sorry about the duplication, but we've put together kind of an initial estimate of the amount and the mix of housing that the city is going to see over the next couple of decades. And we're looking at what does that mean on the ground within the urban growth boundary? And this is going to be as others have said, a head start on doing an actual update of these products that meets the housing goal for the city. And we're also updating our earlier work to incorporate new middle housing types. Cottage clusters are, I hear, really hot in Bend right now. So we're looking at those, and micro units and some of these other middle housing types as well. Next slide. On the employment side, it's a preliminary look at the kind of rate of growth and the mix of housing, mix of job types that you're likely to see in the city. And this is going to be used as a head start on updating the economic opportunities analysis, which is, again, part of the shared prosperity goal of the city council. So just doing a little work kind of as part of an engineering project that helps with some other land use projects and trying to make good use of everybody's time and energy at the city. And so I'm going to turn it over to our friends at Echo Northwest to talk a little bit about the employment side. They're currently going through the this step right now and have a couple of details to share. And so I will turn it over to Margaret Raymond and Beth Goodman on the next slide here.
Sorry, thanks, Andrew. Hi, I'm Margaret Raymond. And so, like Andrew said, we'll talk through some of the analysis that we've started to do. And so first off, what is an economic opportunities analysis? We've thrown this term around a couple of times in the presentation. And so just to reiterate, a typical EOA or economic opportunities analysis includes the items listed in this slide. The items that are highlighted are those that we will be covering through the CSMP land use assumptions process. So it's the buildable lands inventory, as well as a forecast of new employment growth and land need and preliminary land sufficiency. So in this presentation, we'll go through some of the analysis that we've started to do, mostly related to the forecast of new employment growth. So next slide, please. So our first step in the forecast process is to look at covered employment growth in Bend UGB for the 2008 to 2019 period. That's the last economic cycle. And so we've looked at change in employment, and this is the most detailed information that we can get for Bend. And we've also highlighted some sectors where we thought you might be interested in diving deeper. So for example, manufacturing grew over this period by about 127 employees, or an average annual growth rate of 0.4%. Professional science and technical services grew by over 1,500 employees, or about 5.2 average annual growth rate. And healthcare and social assistance also grew quite a bit at almost 4,000 employees, or about 4.3 average annual growth rate. And overall, between 2008 and 2019, the city grew by about 13,641 employees, or an average annual growth rate of 2.4%. And so this data is just one piece of the picture of employment growth. So this is only covered employment, which is employees covered by unemployment insurance. And so not all employees are covered by that. And so the next slide shows an estimate of total employment. So we're going from that covered employment that we have on the previous slide to total employment. And in this table, we've also grouped our sectors by land use types. So those are industrial, retail, commercial, commercial office and services, and government. And in the text box on the left, we show the sectors from the previous table and how those get grouped into these land use types. And so overall, we have a covered employment estimate of about 57,000 employees in 2019. And then we convert that using available data sets to total employment of about 83,758 employees. And so we use this base from 2019 of total employment in order to forecast our employment for the 20-year period. And so the next slide shows we're starting with 2021 for our base year for this forecast. And so we have a couple different options we can use to extrapolate that over the 20-year period. And so the options range at the high end. We could use historic employment growth from the slide a couple tables ago of 2.4%, an average annual growth rate. And so that results in a change of about 53,000 employees over the 20-year period, an increase. And the middle option we have is population growth, which is based on Portland State University's population forecasts, and that's 2.25%. Then we can also use the regional employment growth rate from Oregon Employment Department. It's on the lower side of 0.95%. And so for this process, we're for the preliminary land sufficiency, which is one of the steps we mentioned previously, we'll be doing a range using all these forecast rates. So running out all of these potential rates, and so that we have a range of land sufficiency as our answer for this project.
Looks
So
like Councillor Campbell has a question here.
sure.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry to interrupt. And I missed what covered employment is. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. So
I
covered
thought-
employment is the most detailed data we can get. So that's why we use it as our base. And so it's employees that are covered by unemployment insurance. So that covers most folks, employees in the region, or in the economy, but there are of course people who aren't covered by unemployment insurance who are still part of the overall employment in the city and therefore need land for their employment. So
Thank you, Margaret. Well,
yeah, you're welcome.
could I sneak in one other? And so the overtime, or even just year to year, construction and even retail are so seasonal. Presumably you're comparing like the peak number of construction employees from one year till the peak number in the next year. Is it something like that, you know?
It's the average annual employment. So taken over each month, it's, evened out over the whole year.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Any other questions? All right, that's all I have. I'm not sure who I'm passing it to.
I think our next slide is just some next.
Oh yeah, that's right.
steps
That's right. The next steps. So as a next step, we'll be forecasting by land use type. So that's the slide a couple of slides ago where we showed the groupings of land use types. So we'll be using those 3 forecast rates and running those out by land use type, and then calculating employment density assumptions, as well as analyzing employment by plan designation.
Okay, thanks, Margaret. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So what does this all mean for the CSMP and for our land use assumptions? Basically, we're gonna take the growth in employment, the growth in housing that we're all very aware of, and say, what does it look like in the city to accommodate that growth on the ground here? Where is that possible? Where is that likely? So we did an initial, it's called a buildable lands inventory, where we look at every piece of land in the city and we say, what's the zoning, what's allowed to happen here? Is it already developed? Is it vacant? And we did that for employment lands and for residential lands and mixed use land. So the process of putting together this map of what the future might look like is going to be filling up the vacant land within the study area, which is the urban growth boundary, plus that eastern Stevens Ranch property. And then we're going to have some more growth that we need to accommodate left over. And what we're going to do is look for places where redevelopment and infill seem plausible. And the city's already identified a number of, they were called opportunity areas in the urban growth boundary work. They might have a different nomenclature now, but there are areas of the city that have been discussed as kind of focuses for infill and redevelopment. We're going to look at those and we're going to see what kind of evolution the city needs to take over the next 20 years to accommodate that growth. So over the next month or so, we'll be putting together those maps, and the December meeting of this group, we're going to have some information to talk to you about. And then after that's put together, that's going to be basically the input for the engineers in the collection system master planning process to say, okay, what's the system we're trying to serve here? So I believe the next slide is a little bit of next steps for you all, and I'll hand that off to the CSMP team.
Yeah, thanks. So just kind of covering a couple of key dates that we have in here, especially with the community building subcommittee. We came in August to really present our communications plan, which proposed utilizing the subcommittee as the advisory board. That was approved, so that's why we are here before you today. In October now, we are proposing the land use projections, having that kind of conversation. Once we get some general head nodding in this, the APG team in Echo Northwest will be running with the model, and we hope to come back to you all in December of later this year for kind of an acceptance of the modeling results. Mentioned it earlier that in about February timeframe, we'll be coming to City Council for approval of the Csmp consulting contract. And then that will really kind of initiate a lot of this public engagement process that we will be having with that consultant team. And we will definitely have touch points with the subcommittee as well as other people, agencies, etc., as the project evolves from the spring of 2022 to the completion spring, summer of 2023, with the ultimate adoption right there before the biennium. So those are kind of just some target dates looking forward. So we will bug you one more time at the next subcommittee meeting. So hopefully you guys don't get too tired of us yet, but we're making progress and we'll have some results to present to you in December. And with that, we will open it up for any questions.
Great. Thanks, folks. Nice job. Appreciate everybody's input there and information. It looks like Councilor Keebler has a question.
Yeah, thanks everyone for the presentation. My questions are around sort of timing of this, I guess. So, and this is kind of a basic question, but why are we doing Csmp with all these land use modeling and assumptions before we are doing our required housing needs analysis? Why is this coming before a UGB process? I'm very happy to hear everyone's sort of working together and we're not duplicating efforts, but to me, the HNA, the housing needs analysis and UGB process are going to have their public process and everything over here. Meanwhile, we've already done a public process and done a whole bunch of land use assumptions and growth work for Csmp. So I just think I need to understand more what the timing was here to do this first, because I can see some confusion about having a public process to talk about all this land use and growth and planning, and then we move into a different public process and we were relying on so just help me understand how it all works together. And I think Brian, that's you.
Take it away, Brian.
Well, I'd be happy to have Ryan explain kind of the drivers of the timing of the Csmp. I think it's more in the EIPD court. So Ryan, I think maybe starting there might be good around why that, and then maybe we can address the issue of how this would work with the future future UGB discussion. And I don't want to call it UGB discussion anymore. I think it's really about how to accommodate growth. So Ryan, do you want to start with that? And then I think I'll fold in how we can leverage what we're doing in this work and how it would tie in with the work that we're anticipating doing next year to 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thanks, Brian. That's a great question, Councilor Keebler. So when we, from an engineering perspective, when we look at the 2014 Csmp, we have completed a lot of the work that was identified in that short term, kind of the initial first 10 years of that thing. When you consider the expansion out at the WRF, the Southeast Interceptor, the North Interceptor, all the pump station decommissionings, all the Southwest Sewer Basin work. So from our perspective, we feel like we've really met the objective initially outlined in that 2014 Csmp. So it's just the right time for us to relaunch, and knowing that it's probably going to take 18 months to 2 years. If you look at the sewer collection, the sewer CIP, it's kind of taking a bit of a nosedive because a lot of the projects identified beyond the work we've already done are large impactful things such as a central interceptor or phase 3 of the North Interceptor. And we really feel like the painting has changed quite a bit since 2014. So before we launch into another, or the East Interceptor, before we launch into another $30 or $40 million investment, we want to make sure that we're identifying the right project at the right time. So I think there's, from a timing perspective, if we were to wait another year to 2 years or 3 years for a lot of this work to develop and then launch into a CSMP, we're going to have a gap of 4 to 5 years here that we're not really getting a lot done. And we're going to continue, and I'm not going to use the word moratorium, but we're going to start running into issues where we're going to have trouble providing that basic core service of having capacity in our sewer system. So yeah, in a perfect world, it'd be nice to see Brian and his team identify the housing needs analysis and do all this other stuff. And then we use that data as the basis for even a water master plan or a collections master plan. But I just don't feel like we can wait another 2-3 years to launch into another CSMP to see what this, I think working in conjunction and working in parallel, we're going to get a 90 to 95% solution and have a good project list coming out of this while this other work is going on that Brian is describing. So, we certainly could wait another couple years, but I worry we're going to start running into development and capacity issues where we're going to have to be saying, sorry, we're not sure if the system can handle this or not. Or as a really good example, the Southeast Interceptor was built all the way through Kings Forest and all the way up 27th. But instead of going to the east, to the future East Interceptor, we kind of built this kind of a gap or a short-term solution to go west right there in front of the hospital, knowing it would buy us 5, 7, 10 years. Well, we're not sure where we're at right now. So part of, do we still have 5, 7, or 10 years? I'm thinking we don't, because OSU Cascades is now contributing and they're going to continue to grow. The Southeast Area Plan has been adopted by council, and we need to make sure that there's capacity in the system. The Stevens Tract over on the east side, these are all things that have been brought in, all these expansion areas, all these non-UGB expansion areas, the other DSL properties. So if we don't have a plan in place in the next year to two, I worry that we're going to have to say, sorry, we can't allow development to continue. We can't add more housing until we've waited for the HNA and taken another year to two beyond that to develop this CSMP. So it's not perfect, but we're trying to find that parallel planning effort.
Okay, and Brian, before you jump in, let me just clarify maybe so that you can focus on your answer. I guess that really makes sense on the timing, Brian. I appreciate all of that information. I know it's really, I would love it if we could just line these up in the future.
Yeah,
right?
Me too.
But it's really hard to predict what our needs are going to be necessarily. So Brian, I guess my question really focused for you is how much of this CSMP land use assumption and modeling work is going to be used then for a future growth accommodation process? Just for everyone to know, is this really where the work is being done, or how much, what other inputs and other things are going to come in when we get to that other, as you called it, a growth accommodation process?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think, so let's talk about time horizons, right? So the time horizon on the collection system master plan, is it 2042, 3? Okay. So keep that in mind. So we're making, what you've been listening to is we're making predictions about the future employment, predictions about future housing, right? So that timeline out at the end of this planning period is roughly 22, 23 years from now. When we do the UGB work or the accommodating growth work, we're going to be using around the same endpoint. So 2043, 2044. So the endpoints and those numbers, the basic inputs in terms of population employment are roughly going to be the same, right? And here's the other important point is that all of the assumptions for the collection systems master plan are within this UGB. So all that growth is being put into essentially the geographic area of the current UGB. And I think we also are considering the East Stevens Ranch parcel as well. So we're not extending it out and assuming growth is going to be way over here, way over there. It's all within this current UGB. And so the way I look at this is it's not informal, it's very technical, but you're getting, as Ryan said, pretty darn close with these numbers of housing units and employment. We're making assumptions now about the spatial allocation of that growth. And so this is really important, but we're doing it based on the acknowledged plans of today, right? I think it sets us up really well to have this discussion in the next couple of years around the implications of accommodating growth in a different manner. So I don't think it puts us at a disadvantage. If we're being pretty straightforward here, you know, a lot of that growth is it's going to be assumed in some of these opportunity areas. There's basic general infill that's kind of spread around. Vacant land is assumed to be developed within the ranges of density that are currently allowed. Those are all safe assumptions for now. If we get to a point in the next couple of years where we say, well, we're going to make some big policy change, right, around, say, climate-friendly area, then we would take this work here and say, okay, well, here's the system we assumed. Let's pump up the redevelopment here, 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 here. How would that system, what would need to change with that system if a change is required? So I do agree with your point too about syncing things up. Ryan and I have talked about this for years, and something I think for this council to consider is that as we move forward, to really tie together, you know, it's going to be every 3 to 5 years. The House Bill 2003 is going to require us to do this work anyway. So we're required to do it, but we sync these things up. What are our projections and predictions about the future? Employment, housing. Where are we going to accommodate growth? Then what are the systems that are needed? Transportation, water, and sewer. We're not there yet, but I think this has been successful in the past. This approach has been successful. Things don't always sync up perfectly. But I do not think this is, I think this is a good investment to help us move forward in all of our work and address the issues Ryan mentioned, which I think are more pressing than today, you know, today's development trends and things that are happening on the ground.
Andrew, did you have something you wanted to add to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add the work that we're doing now, as I said kind of early on, is going to go through this filter of basically engineering sewer assumptions. And so it totally makes sense to, you know, hand them a plausible scenario of what the city looks like. And then there's going to be a lot of judgments from the engineers about what's a worst case kind of situation here. I'm sure there's going to be some amount of testing of it. If this doesn't come out exactly as we had planned, what is that going to mean? And they're going to know the answers to those questions. So this is a kind of outgrowth of planning policy so far and kind of our best guess at this point. But there's going to be a lot of engineering judgments that go into what happens for the CSMP here. So that's maybe one reason why it doesn't need to be the same level of engagement or of planning that your H&A and EOA might have to have.
Thank you, Andrew. Barb, did you have a separate question or something to add to the conversation?
Well, yeah, no, I very much had the exact same question as Melanie had. And specifically, I thought that UGB work, growth accommodation work, had to be done next year. I didn't think we were off by 3 or 4 years' time. Is I just wrong about that, or do we start next year? Brian, I'm calling you, Brian.
Sure. Well, let's think about this because Councilor Campbell, you were around for the last kind of big policy discussion regarding accommodating growth. And as you know, when you're updating an EOA, a formal adoption of an employment opportunities analysis, a formal adoption of a buildable lands inventory, a formal adoption of a housing capacity analysis, and then having a discussion about how to accommodate that growth, it's not a year-long process. So sure. At a minimum, it's like I would say it's a 2-year process at an absolute minimum, right? So these are in your council goals, right? And so what we're doing is I'll just share that right now, there's some real world considerations here too. Right now, I think on this call, you have all of the planners and your growth management staff present. We have three unfilled positions, or 2 unfilled positions and somebody out on maternity leave. So the very real issues of just trying to get work done with between Damien and Brian. So there's that issue. So when we start this work, we're planning on having Brian Gale who's a really talented planner. She's on maternity leave. She's going to come back here in January. We're going to kick into the RFP process to launch all of the work associated with those council goals. So now we need to update the documents, and we're going to stepwise figure out the need. That's going to take probably a year. And then we talk about how we're going to accommodate that growth. By then also those climate friendly and equitable communities rules will be out. So we're going to know what we're dealing with. That's really important. And that's June. So we're going to be scoping this work before those rules are done, trying to anticipate our best on what this means. And then we're going to head into that work. And so we'll be talking to the council and the public about what all, how this all fits together and the timelines and the advantages and disadvantages of different approaches on moving through this discussion with the community and the council. But
and did you say you're assuming that growth for the next 20 years will be in our current boundaries? That's the assumption you're working on?
No, I mean, it's not, it's a different set of questions. I mean,
okay.
You're starting with these.
That's what we're supposed to figure out starting next year.
Exactly.
Is whether or not we need to grow, right? Brian, yes, I absolutely was around. We called that little pipe stubby, and those of us who were around, none of us was happy about having to build stubby. And my memory was that had to do with the state not allowing us to plan to the east of our boundaries. So even though we knew we were going to expand to the east, I don't know. So, but for today, what my question is, should we be lobbying the state? Is there something wrong at, the level of state land use where, we should be talking to our representatives and our lobbyists about our ability to plan our sewer system without ending up building little stubby pipes?
I'd be happy to respond to that, Councilor
Thanks,
Campbell.
Ryan.
I think the North Interceptor is a good example of, it really depends on how we phrase it. We built the North Interceptor from the plant outside of the city limits to serve the UGB on the north end of town. If we phrase the East Interceptor in a way that this is meant to take flows out from the existing system and not frame it in a way that it's meant to serve an eastward expansion, I think we're fine. Doesn't mean we're not going to have that in the back of our mind when we plan the East Interceptor. But yeah, I didn't want to say stubby, but you're right. That's what we called it. And really, that was meant to buy us some time. It didn't mean we would never have to build the East Interceptor, sure. But for a short-term investment, we could buy 5, 7, maybe 10 years. And we just don't know what that mark is today. So we know it's coming, but the CSMP is going to tell us basically based on these assumptions, we're going to need to start design in say 2025 with the intention of building it in 2027. And again, that's a large investment. And we just want to make sure we can come to council with accurate data to say, we believe we've hit that trigger point, or we will hit that trigger point. So we don't have to worry about telling developments that, sorry, you're going to have to wait 2 years while we go build this thing. We want to be ready when the development asks for it.
Thank you very much.
Does that answer your questions, Barb?
Oh, there's no answer to my questions, you guys. You all know this. We're all, constantly analyzing, imagining, talk to PSU. What do they think's going to happen? And then we watch the numbers roll in, and nobody can even imagine how much growth we have or are going to have, So I appreciate you guys having to work in this system of, prediction. Crystal balls, get the crystal balls out. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the inconsistency between planning timelines and the reality of infrastructure investments is something that I still think our land use system needs to get a better handle on.
So that's exactly my question. I'm very serious about that. Should we be talking to our state rep? Should we be talking to our lobbyist? Do we know what changes we would even ask for if we were going to do that. So I just think that is something we should all have in our minds and be looking at. Thank you.
Thank you. Russ, you have something for the group?
I do. Good morning, everybody. Just a couple things to add. Barb, first of all, you do get naming rights for Stubby, just so you know. That is definitely you came up with that name, and we still refer to it as Stubby sometimes around here. So a couple things that you've hit on that great. This is a great conversation for engineers and planners that has been going on since the dawn of the Oregon land use system. A couple things that we will be doing around this. One is, I don't know if Barb, if you remember back when we did the first CSMP, we do sensitivity testing on the model, right? So what we're going to do is say, great, this is the plan flow based off of these assumptions. Add another 10, 20, 30% of flow to the model. See if we get the same results, or does something truly trigger to say, yeah, we can accommodate what the planning has, that, the planning forecast, but if we had another 10 or 20% flow to that, do we have a bigger problem, or does that solution set still work for the sewer system? Because that'll give us some idea of what's going on. The second thing we're going to do to answer kind of Melanie's question is we're going to look at everything holistically. Once we truly understand what's going on with the climate friendly rulemaking, the climate city stuff, we're going to look at like kind of A to Z. What does this all mean? From what those rules say, what our housing needs analysis and that House bill guidelines that we're under, and then what that means for future expansions or future policy work. We really need to take a step back because of all this stuff just getting dropped in our lap right now to say, how do we want to accommodate it? How do we want to set up the work plan? And how do we make sure that things are sequenced correctly, not only for our requirements for the state, but also for what's in council goals and what we're trying to achieve locally. So that's all on the horizon, because all this new information coming in, we're going to have to do that to make sure that we're coordinated and moving forward.
Thank you. Thanks, you guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks, folks. Yeah, and I would say, thanks to Brian, Damian, Ryan, Russ, and others. The sequencing might not always be, extremely, I guess, sequential in everybody's mind, but I think the more routine conversations we're having about master planning, about infrastructure, and having that happen on a, at most every 5-year timeline assures that if one set of assumptions wasn't exactly correct, well, you know what, we're going to be talking about another planning process in another year or two. We can make sure to massage those assumptions and keep them current. And so that's what I think has been a pretty big leap forward for this organization. Is UGBs and CSMPs and all those things used to be like huge events that we did just every so often. And now that we have this more refined approach where you're just doing tuning and making minor changes moving forward, I think it just keeps everything more current and more true to reality of what we're seeing from the development standpoint, what we're seeing out of Salem, and what we're seeing with our own community's ambitions. So I think that is we're still in the midst of that transition. We haven't, nailed it just yet, but I think we're getting to the point where we're going to be having minor adjustments versus major, whoops, we really need to change. It's just being on top of it. So thanks to the team for doing that. Brian, I saw you took your mute button off. I don't know if you have something to add before we move on.
Oh, sorry about that.
No worries. Okay, well, thanks, folks. If there's anything else on this, I really appreciate the help of the folks from Angela Planning Group and Echo Northwest. Nice job. Everybody have a good day. Thanks for your help. And we will transition to Susanna Jalber, who is going to discuss some of the survey results from the proposed plan amendments for shelters. So take it away, Susanna.
Good morning, counselors. Nice to see you all. So today I just wanted to give you an update on the story map and the survey on the shelter code amendments that we've got going on. Have you all had a chance to look at it and take it? Go through it? Counselor Schenkelberg? No? Okay. You have till Monday to do it. So I just wanted to sort of give you an update on the status of the survey and the numbers, and maybe not so much on the meat of the code amendments or anything, but just talk to you a little bit about that. So as of Monday, we've had 702 folks take the survey, which is pretty good. I mean, of course, we're not thinking anything statistically valid about this, but it just gives us good qualitative information as the sounding board moves forward with their code amendments. Let's see, I want to tell you also, I went to the NLA a couple weeks ago and went through how to negotiate the survey and how to take it. Planning Commission and the BDAB Advocacy Committee on Monday. The HREC, I'll either go tonight or Shelley Smith is going to give an update just on the numbers and remind the HREC folks that they can go ahead and take it. And then, yeah, the survey closes on the first Monday. There's a lot of information to go through, and our next sounding board meeting will be November 10th. So a few Wednesdays from now, where the sounding board will review all the information. I'm going to try and go through and summarize all of it. It's coming back to me, all the survey results in an Excel spreadsheet, and I can do some sorting of questions and get that together. And then hopefully they'll make their final recommendations on the code package. And then it will go to Planning Commission in January, Planning Commission work session on January 10th. And then on the 24th will be the public hearing. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of update you on the numbers. I haven't gone through all the comments we've gotten, but Councilor Keebler gave me a heads up today that there was an editorial in the bulletin about the survey and the hardship shelter versus the temporary shelter, and that we maybe intentionally omitted some information, and we didn't do that, but just wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit. So we have, the permanent shelters, the outdoor shelter, the group shelter, and the multi-room shelter type proposed. And then in addition to that is a temporary shelter, which is good for 180 days. And really that's intended for like an organization, like a church or school, anything, if there's excessive smoke, things like that, they can stand up a shelter. They don't need to go through a land use process or a notification process. And while we were doing these shelter code amendments, we thought it would be a good idea to go ahead and codify that ability for an organization to do that without notification of a neighbor. So we've gotten a little bit of pushback on that, I guess, in some of the comments. And I know you've all been getting lots of comments on the survey and on houselessness in general. So I'd be curious to hear your take on that. But our feeling, I guess, staff, and we talked about this with the sounding board a little bit too, but is that, an organization shouldn't have to go through a land use process or a special permit process if it's a unsafe, excessive cold, excessive heat. A lot of cities put up heat shelters, and we don't feel like that should be a process that the neighbors should necessarily need to weigh in on. And I mean, that's maybe not a popular opinion, but I hope none of the neighbors that are complaining need to use one of those shelters at any time in their lives. So, if there needs to be safe places for people to go during the day, we wanted to give people the ability to do that. And then the other sort of thing that's come up, I would say the review of the comments I've received are mostly negative regarding the concept of the RV in the driveway, because it's a valid point. We can't require management of those the same way we can require management if like a service provider's putting up a outdoor shelter or something. There needs to be a good neighbor agreement and things like that. And there isn't a good way for us to do that with the hardship shelter, which is the RV in the driveway. So it's a valid point, and I think the sounding board will probably weigh in on that at the November 10th meeting. And also what's coming up is the time period that the hardship shelter is allowed. So if you recall, we came to you at your last meeting and we discussed, the time it would need for someone to like find housing, maybe save up money to put a deposit down, maybe even go through a permit process if their home was burned down or something like that, and figured a year was probably a good amount of time. But we're getting a lot of, no, that's too long, and especially the ability to renew 2 additional times, which effectively gives the person 3 years really to have, a houseless person or a person in need on their property living there without going through a land use permit. So those are kind of the 2 things we're hearing about mostly. You're probably hearing about that too in all the comments you're receiving. But yeah, I guess I'll stop there. I was going to go through at all the meetings I've been walking through the survey and showing how to go through it, but I think you're all familiar with that. So I would just answer questions from you.
I apologize. I'm not so sure who had their hand up first, but I'm just going to go left to right. Melanie.
Thanks,
what question do you have?
John. Thanks, Susanna. So on the RV, allowing people to host people in an RV, I would love, and it might be helpful to sounding or not, Portland has done this, I think, or some version of this. So I would love, we have somebody we could look to. How is it going? Are they seeing some of those issues people are worried about, et cetera? I will make the point, we just got an email from a constituent today who has been saving for 2.5 years to try to buy a home and is with a pretty good salary, not able to do it. So I think when I'm thinking about, how long should we allow some of this hardship, that comes to mind of just how hard it is to get housing here. And so then, the other question, the other thing I wanted to bring up was when you started talking about the piece of code that we're updating that was not part of the survey, which was about temporary and basically emergencies. I just wanted to, state for anyone watching, this has happened. First Presbyterian, before we got our Second Street shelter up, and during smoke, did this, right? They did it without a land use process. They worked with the city, they worked with our fire department, they put tents in their church, they helped keep people out of the cold and out of the smoke. And so I think what this code is that Susanna just said is just saying, let's just put that in writing, that process we already have been working with people to do in emergencies. The survey was more focused on the more permanent or longer term types of shelter that we're making changes for in our code. So that's the distinction I would make. And I don't think anyone was hiding the ball. I think that it makes sense to me that emergency action is something we should put in our code, but that doesn't necessarily need to be part of this survey that was focused on the longer term stuff. So thanks, Susanna.
Barb?
Yeah, my comment was pretty much very much the same. Every winter, the city manager declares a cold emergency when the weather turns cold. And those emergency declarations are what give churches, businesses, anybody the ability to do exactly what Melanie just gave an example of, that, we've had this running for as long as I've been on council. We have declared a cold emergency every winter. And again, that is what allows, honestly, if a big, Fred Meyer could allow people to sleep on the floor during a cold emergency if they wanted to. And so, yeah, I also just wanted to point out that this is already something that happens, and we're just trying to get that into the code where people can look and see, okay, next winter, if there's an emergency, what is that going to mean for us? And the other comment I would make about that RV in the driveway, I feel like, those have very much oversight because they're allowed on somebody else in somebody else's driveway. The somebody else, whoever it is that is either owns that property or lives there, they are the ones who are not going to continue to allow someone to stay in their driveway if that person is causing trouble or committing crimes, heaven forbid, or something. So, for me, that was a big consideration as far as that specific idea of the safe parking. Again, that there's a property owner who is very much involved in whether or not the RVs are, okay there. And the other thing I've been pointing out to people who write is that this really started because of those big fires in 2019. We saw so many people, entire communities wiped out across the state. And we very much wanted to do our part, to do what we could to help people. And then after that, came the thought that, why do we care why somebody lost their home? What difference does it make if you're homeless because of a fire or because of a medical bill that you couldn't pay, or, and with that is the case, then yeah, we have this safe parking program where if you would like, you can have someone living in your driveway for free. You cannot, this is not a money-making opportunity. This is not a chance for someone to have a little ADU or vacation rental in their driveway. This is the chance for our big-hearted community members to be able to help. So thank you.
Thank you, Barb. Rita.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Susanna, and to the entire task force for all of the work that they've been doing, because I know that it's been quite detailed and tedious and tumultuous, and you all have received a lot of feedback on both sides. And just kind of very similar to our previous presentation is that we just don't have enough housing for the humans that live here. And so this is us as the city taking the responsibility of trying to find as many solutions as possible and having processes for all of those solutions. And so it's something that feels like a necessity to me. And hearing the concerns to me feels a lot like, trying to understand like the empathy, like being empathetic to the human beings who are having different lived experiences than us. Like I'm a city councilor and a licensed professional mental health counselor, and I cannot afford to own a home in the city of Bend. And everyone's like, what? And I was like, yeah, like I'm a human being who hold all of these titles, and that's not a reality for me. And so there are many humans like me who want to live here, contribute, whether it's through governance or mental health or the 20 million other ways that you can contribute to this community, and they can't afford to live here. And the rental scarcity is real, like constantly getting texts from people in the community of not finding anywhere to live. And so like, it is also right, saving up for a home, but often people on single incomes or dual incomes or who have kids or all of these other factors can't afford to, buy a home. And some of them can't afford to rent an apartment because apartments are going for a lot of money. And part of that is because we don't have enough. And we all live in Bend because we love living in Bend. So we understand why everyone is here. And so just kind of reiterating that point that it is the city has a lot of housing responsibility. And so this is us taking that housing responsibility and creating processes to support our community, because everyone deserves to be served by the city of Bend, not just landowners. And so I just think that's a really important point to make, because many people rent in Bend. That's a reality. Many people who do a lot of really great work for this community, and I don't want them to leave because they don't have anywhere to be. And I think that there are very specific stigmas of people who like need hardship shelters, but the reality is like people's houses do burn down. We do have like a climate crisis on our hands that requires like that we need to step up in Central Oregon. So those are just kind of my general thoughts, and thank you to the other counselors that spoke before me, and for the task force continuing to navigating all of those very tedious codes.
Thank you, Rita. You have a great way of distilling things into very understandable format that we don't get to hear in these conversations too often. So thank you. I really appreciate your perspective. Yeah.
Could I say another thing? I'm sorry. Please. One, how grateful I am that we have Rita, you on council, finally, someone who does not own their home, it absolutely does make a difference. And I'm just so glad that you're there with us. And thank you for sharing, because you do have a perspective that is unique to, sadly, most people in leadership positions are homeowners. So thank you, Rita, so much for that. The only thing I wanted to add, and this is something I tell folks, kind of to give them an idea of the landscape, is that right now we are still under the state's super citing bill. The state legislature passed a bill that got the nickname super citing, as in where can you cite something? And the answer the state gave to that question was anywhere. The state very much acknowledged that we are in a crisis here. It is the entire state. And if we need to take emergency measures, we can. So that super citing bill says that we can just straight up do all of the things, any of the things that the sounding board has been considering. We as a city did not think that that was the best way forward. We did not think it was a good idea to just impose these things on our community and say, the state said we can do it, and so we are. So we are taking this opposite approach of deciding for ourselves, where do we think we could house people, under what conditions, how many people in all of these different zones. And yes, it's been tedious work going through, literally trying to decide, how many people do we think would be appropriate? And the whole idea there, we have the opposite example, that 9th Street property. The community found out that we own this piece of property, that we don't own very many pieces of property at all, and that we were looking at this as a site potentially to house folks who are experiencing homelessness. Well, the community heard that without any sideboards in place whatsoever. And rightly so, they are freaking out. They are freaking out because they have no idea what might be possible there, what limitations there are, what restrictions there could be. So we're trying to give people the certainty that, if something comes up in the future, they can look at our code and say, okay, in this neighborhood, it could only be this or that. It could never be this other thing. Give people some certainty, take away some of that anxiety as far as what actually might happen in their own neighborhoods. So I think it's important to keep reminding people that that's really how this all started, was from this landscape of super citing. And, we're trying to change the code to actually be appropriate for Bend and all of our neighborhoods. Thank you again.
Thank you, Barbara. Appreciate the background. I think it does help tell the full story. So very much appreciated. Susanna, anything to wrap up with?
Yeah, thanks so much for the input. You all say things very eloquently, so thank you very much. And I just wanted to say too that getting back to the temporary shelter, there are provisions in the code. I just brought it up. They do need to meet basic fire, life safety, and have all their electrical permits and a proper waste disposal method, things like that. Most of these are probably going to go in existing buildings, churches, gyms, whatever it might be. Fred Meyer, that's a great idea. But if an outdoor shelter wanted to pop up for an emergency, it still would need to meet basic, fire, life safety type stuff, building code stuff. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. But thank you, and I'll try and get in touch with somebody at City of Portland. They're pretty bit. It's been hard to touch base with somebody there, but yeah. Okay, thank you.
Excellent.
Take the survey.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
There we go. Thanks, Susanna. Take the survey. Words to live by. Okay, so, and again, that is up Monday, November 1st. It's open until 5 or noon or, okay, somewhere in there. Do it on Monday if you can't get to it sooner. Okay, the last item we have is Brian Rankin just giving us a little bit of an update on the work that's going into the DSL property that is really looking to be an addition to our UGB through House Bill 3318. So we've got a lot of work to do as a city and as a community, and Brian's going to summarize some of that for you. So take it away, Brian.
Thank you, John, and good morning again, councilors. How much time do we have left? I want to make sure we can fit this in.
We've got plenty of time. It's
plenty of time. Okay. Well, let me share the screen. I was just going to ad lib, but then I started really digging into the bill and realized, you know, might be better to put some of this down in writing. So let's see if I can figure this out. Let's see. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I can't see you. So John, do me a favor and call out raised hands.
You got it.
Everyone disappeared from the screen. So East Stevens Road Tract conceptual plan. I think the council is well aware of the House Bill 3318 that was passed in this last legislative session. And so we're trying to move into this project in pretty short order here. So let me just start with there's a graphic that shows the location of the site. Let's see, can you see my cursor?
Yes, we can, Brian.
Okay,
Yes.
so it's this portion of the site here. Stevens Ranch is a recently approved master plan to the west. So that's what you're seeing here, kind of the land uses and the arrangement of roadways. You'll see 27th Street to the west of the site and Stevens Ranch. You have Ferguson, and you have Reed Market and Stevens Road here. So the portion of the bill is pertaining to this 261 acres. The graphic also shows some of the neighboring lot lines to the east. It shows topography as well. So the heavier shading that you see, it's kind of a slope analysis. So it shows the steeper parts of the site. So as you know, that the bill passed, City of Bend staff, lobbyists, and a number of other people really contributed to the effort on that piece of legislation. It is very unique, very different than any other UGB expansion approach that I've worked on. I think it's pretty unique within the state of Oregon. So I think it's a great opportunity. And we're really hoping to do this right and to address not just I would say the requirements of the bill, but also to, live up to the spirit of the bill as well. It's about 260 acres in site size. And then the concept is around a mostly residential style development with affordable housing, deed restricted affordable housing, as well as market rate housing. The bill references, an emphasis on multimodal development patterns, mixes of uses, transit, walking, biking, as a part of this, as part of the design concept. And then I think using a local term, we use the local term of complete communities. Complete communities are described in more detail in our comprehensive plan, chapter 11 of that plan. But in essence, it's a blend of uses that are appropriate for this particular location. So the bill, I'm trying to, summarize a bill pretty quickly. It's clear it'll be mostly residential. However, there will be some employment land, mixing these uses. Of course, parks, which would go along with the eventual master planning, transportation options, transit services. We'll have to work with CET on that. And then there's some other interesting parts of the bill too around resource protections. So to the extent that there may be natural, historical, cultural resources on the site, we would need to have some regulations and policies that would protect those through subsequent development. And then also some fire resiliency standards as well. So that's kind of a nutshell of the bill. And I'll pause and then, because I can't see any hands raised. move on.
No hands are raised, Brian.
Okay, good, thank you. Kind of flying blind here. So the House bill, folks have read this. It's can be a little convoluted. It's taken me, I mean, each one of us reads it and you read it again, and read it again. So what I'm trying to do is distill the process because the process is unique to this site. There are deadlines in this bill that we really have to hit. So there's certain kind of, I'll call them dependencies, drivers, dependencies, certain things have to happen before other things. So the bill specifies that a concept plan has to be approved by the City Council by July 1st of 2022. And we have to send DLCD, and I apologize for the acronym. DLCD is Department of Land Conservation and Development. We send them a letter that says we want to move forward with the subsequent planning processes. We have to do that by July 1st of 2022. And then just in terms of, so you understand the kind of context maybe on the inside is that we had our supplemental budgets approved, I believe, in August, September. Those things are finalized. All the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed. And then we very quickly moved into some discussions about scoping and how we would approach this. We have a contract that was just approved. I want to say it was 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago. So we're just starting this process out in order to hit that deadline. After that deadline, there's another deadline, which is December 31st of 2022, where the city has to send a letter to DLCD, and it expresses a non-binding intent to consider this conceptual plan. And the Division of State Lands, or DSL, has to do the same thing on the same deadline. And essentially that we're consenting to moving forward with the UGB expansion and subsequent planning amendments. And also there has to be an agreement in place that would be binding on the successors and owners for how the land for deed restricted affordable housing would be conveyed over time. And then also a price per acre for that conveyance. And it's roughly about 20 acres of land for affordable housing. So after that, the LCD would then say, okay, we received the letters, you did a concept plan. And let me just mention that DLCD has a chance to say, well, you didn't quite get it right, we're going to remand you. So you have to fix something. So that's built into our concept plan after we submit it to DLCD. But DLCD would approve the UGB expansion. Okay, this acreage is now in the UGB. And then the city would have to adopt an ordinance for more formal planning amendments by January 1st of 2025. So after that's all done, then the Division of State Lands would go through a similar process they use for Stephen Ranch, which is, okay, we have this property, now it can be sold, and then that sale could then trigger eventual development. Those timelines are not in the bill. So we're not quite sure when that property would develop or if it would develop, assuming it would because of the precedent set by Stevens Ranch. So let me stop there and see if there are any questions.
I don't see any questions for you, Brian.
I am glad it's clear.
I think your description of convoluted is accurate.
So the planning amendments, what would this look like? So here's the way I'm kind of conceptualizing the concept plan. The concept plan is not really defined that well in the bill. It's a loose term. And so it can mean different things to different people. A concept plan for a developer can get very specific. A concept plan can be more visions, aspirations. So what would a concept plan be in this case? I'll describe it a little bit more, but if you can imagine it as a step to inform, learn, and engage around the site, development issues, things that would come out of our learning process there will influence policy in the planning amendments. Those planning amendments will reside most likely in a chapter of our comprehensive plan that is written around how the city is aspiring to grow, concepts on growth, the things that are important to bend in growth. And there are also specific policies targeting specific UGB areas. So each UGB expansion area that was established in 2016 has a set of specific policies. A housing mix, certain density ranges, certain numbers of employees or acreage for employment, coordination with parks and schools, maybe coordination with Avion where that's appropriate. On the DSL site that was brought in the UGB that's now Stevens Ranch, there were caves. So we added a specific policy saying that you need to address these caves and look at protection, address this and do more detailed work. So these policies are directive. And those policies then influence the master planning process that would take place later on if and when this property would develop. So in this case, we know there will be policies in the growth management chapter. We'll be amending that, essentially our comprehensive plan after the concept plan to do some of these planning amendments. I wanted to focus a little bit on residential because I think that will be the majority of the site. And it's a very unique opportunity that this bill affords, which is it's both a mix of market rate and de-restricted affordable housing. For the housing overall, it has to be a minimum of 9 units per gross acre. So you figure out how much residential land you have, and you say, well, if it's 100 acres, we need 900 units or more. The mix has to exceed the currently adopted housing mix. And I put an example here. So an example of that would be, well, the mix of housing in your site has to be at least 50% detached, 10% single family, 40% multifamily. Those numbers can change, but it has to exceed our local housing mix. And then there's land for affordable housing. And there are different kinds there are different acreages of that land. So 12 net acres that would be zoned and eventually conveyed to, I believe, the city for housing that's 60% or less AMI. And then 6 net acres of land zoned for affordable housing, 80% or less of area median income. And I apologize again for the acronym. And then there's some interesting provisions around priority for households that have 1 or more employees working for an education provider. And then there are 2 net acres for where 80% of the units are affordable to 80% or less AMI. I saw Lynn on this call, and Lynn McConnell is our local expert, and I'm coordinating with her on this. But this is more or less what the bill says in terms of how that affordable housing land would be conveyed, or at least I should say structured. And I'll move on. Any questions on that before I jump?
Brian, can I sneak in a question, please?
Please.
So the priority for education providers, is that because the land was an education trust kind of a thing? Is that why education providers?
Well, I have to be honest here, Counselor. When bills are being created, constructed, written, drafted, and negotiated at the legislative level, I don't exactly know all of the factors that would lead to that. There were multiple versions of this bill over the course of a year or two. And this is what ended up sticking. Lynn may have more background on that, but I do believe that it does have to do with the fact that the sale of the proceeds from this site, from the Division of State Lands, would go towards the Common School Fund. So I think that linkage between DSL selling land, those monies going to the Common School Fund, and then affordable housing for education providers, I believe that's why there's that linkage.
That's my guess too. Otherwise, I would say, why education providers? Why not firefighters? Why not police officers? So thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Barb, I'll pipe up and just say, because that's what was negotiated.
There you go.
Simple answer.
Thank you, Melanie. And it is actually in the bill. This is, yeah, got it. Thank you.
Correct. So concept plan approach. And then I wanted to talk just a little bit about what I'm anticipating your role will be in this short project. So I think first and foremost, some things that we heard, that we've observed, is that because this was done through legislative action, I think it took people by surprise. And people have different reactions to this piece of legislation. I think there's a lot of, it's kind of confusing too. So even somebody who reads legislation and law, it's not intuitive. So I think there's a great opportunity here just to speak with the public about what this is, what does the bill do? How is this different in that DSL would be selling this property, the money gets used for the Common School Fund. How is that money used? A little bit more of that kind of background on the bill, how we got here. So it's a great opportunity to educate people about what and why and the opportunities that this provides. And with that education to listen, I think we're going to hear quite a bit of concern about development in general. For example, we don't want additional urban development in this area. We're concerned about traffic impacts. We're concerned about natural resources. There are a lot of concerns out there. So I want to construct the engagement around just listening and allow people to have that voice, even if it's a voice where they may, quite frankly, not like this idea. I think that's okay. So to listen to their concerns, and then also through that process to learn about the site. We may learn things that we don't know because we haven't put our attention there. And we're doing this all within a very tight timeline. I think that's the real challenge of this, is that I think I mentioned this in the last work session with council, is that there's a trade-off between speed and engagement. A 6 to 8 month project is flying from a long-range planning perspective. So we're trying to do our best within these timelines. We're going to be balancing these the desire to move quickly, but also be as inclusive as we can. And then I also just have to mention that there are just very real constraints on our staffing as well. So the concept plan it's high level, so it's not regulatory. So I just, as you're thinking about this, very different, for example, than the code related to shelters, which is these will be the standards. They're very specific. Think of this as more, there are various options for land use. There are options for transportation systems. Here are options for tree preservation. Here are options for how you can make this development more sustainable. Here are options for how to serve it with sewer. So we're learning and sharing options, getting feedback on those. It's not regulatory. So the purpose, I think, is to learn in order to influence the policy that will come in our next step. The deliverable will be flipbook style. So it's say less text, more visual, fairly brief, maybe chapters by subject, land use, existing conditions, topography, residential uses, affordable housing, sewer, water, transportation. But I think it's something that should have some pop. It's something that should be a light read, but put together in a way that explains what's going on and the different options for the site. And I mentioned already that this will inform the planning amendments in the next step. So we want to learn to inform those policy requirements. And then the public engagement, I think partially because of COVID and the remote working situation, I'd love to do hands-on workshops and really go out there and really embed this within the community. We're going to have to use some of these online tools. Surveys similar to what you were speaking with Susanna about. I think this project actually lends itself to that. So we're going to be doing, I think, 3 of those within the project and ask people questions for feedback. If I have time and capacity, I would love to just get out there too and actually just walk to some of the neighboring properties or send out mailers to folks so folks in the county can actually be aware of this because we're at that interface between urban and rural. And then agency coordination is another part of this. So we'll be working with ODOT and the county, particularly on transportation issues. We'll reach out to Avion, school district parks. Those things are really going to come into play here. And then what's your role? I think again, consider it's pretty short, pretty fast project. So I would like to be able to share the progress on the project, get your input, and see what, just so you're aware of what's happening, make sure that you're comfortable with the direction of the project and the products. And then we'll try to check in with around milestones. I'm thinking there's some natural places to have touch points, particularly around before, after online surveys and touch points with the public. And then if there are any issues that arise, then of course I want to bring these to you. And I've also spoken with Ben Hempson and Lynn and Colin Stevens about, if we need more input from that, from an advisory board perspective, what would be an efficient way to do that within the constraints. And it feels like, working with the Planning Commission in work session formats that allow BDAB and AHAC to both participate, so they can all participate together. So we're going to pull them into. Questions on that?
Thanks, Brian. It looks like Barb has a question, and then Melanie.
Thank you. Brian, my first question actually was the last slide. So on the 20 acres of affordable housing, it's broken down. There we are. So do we have any minimums for number of units that we expect on those acres, or is it the same exceeding 9 units per acre?
So we know that it would have to exceed 9 units per acre. We know that the housing mix would have to exceed the attached single family and multifamily housing types. But at this point, we don't know exactly how many units. You can kind of estimate it, you can estimate based on this of a certain minimum number of units. But part of the concept plan will be to explore what would be the form, function, how many housing units, and what type could you get at 9 units per acre? What about 12 or 15? What about a little higher? Let's look at these things and see what the different implications are for housing out there, and learn too if the site can accommodate that level of development. So right now, Councillor, we could wag it, but I think it's you're probably looking at 100, and it would be 180 or more. So,
would this go through? Hi, Lynn. I see you there with your hand up. So would these 20 acres go through an RFP like we usually do for affordable housing?
Brian, I can jump in if that's okay.
I would love that.
Brian has the front end of all the planning on this, but certainly I was involved in discussing. So the reason that we selected these acreages is to align with the financing that's available from the state and federal government. So the 1 acre parcels are really intended to be in sort of the land trust model for ownership that we're seeing from a number of our partners right now. Core Community Land Trust and Habitat are both developing ownership model in 1 acre chunks, either via townhomes or cottages or some such thing. So that's really what we were looking at in those 2 parcels. The larger 6 acre chunks are intended to be 4% tax credit projects, which means that in theory, we could get between 200 and 300 units on each of those 6 acre parcels. So we are intending to maximize, I'd say, the density on those to make sure that we are really, really taking advantage of this opportunity to the best of our abilities. So I would intend, I think how we've discussed it internally is that once this land, the affordable housing land, transfers to the city of Bend, we would intend to enter into a long-term lease with developers on those 6 acre parcels that would be done through our traditional procurement process of an RFP. So most likely the AHAC would then review those proposals, see who's giving us the most bang for our buck, et cetera. I think that there will be future discussion with you all and with city leadership on the ownership parcels, the 1 acre parcels, and whether or not that makes sense to transfer or hold. Land trusts just have different financing setups and sort of how that works. So I think that that would make a lease more complex. But the idea is that although we intend to develop out the affordable housing pretty much at the highest density levels in those larger parcels that we can, that there may be a very long-term strategy for the city to retain ownership of those parcels also. So I think that's how we've been really looking at that long-term, and that still gets the units on the ground, but also kind of gives us a very long game and in the land ownership. Does that help?
Oh, it absolutely does. Thank you very much. I think I had another question, but I can't remember. Go ahead, Melanie.
Yeah, Brian, my question was more after next slide, which I'm hoping is maybe your last slide because we're interrupting you. But I just wanted to say, you know, I want to acknowledge the really tight timeline we have on this and the pressure it's going to put on staff and the way that it's going to, frankly, limit the amount of public engagement we can do on this. And I just wanted to give my feedback that I really would love the focus when talking to the public to be really focused on education, because this is a very complicated and weird bill that a lot of people don't understand or may not even be fully aware of. And so I think it's so important to start every conversation with, as you did today, here's the hard outlines, folks. Like, we're here today to talk with you about this. We certainly want to hear what you have to say, but it's just not going, if it's sort of what Barb said, if you think not teachers, firefighters, we can't do that. It's in the bill, right? Or, you know, and especially when we're talking about the concept plan too, helping people understand what the concept plan is versus the eventual land use processes for master planning and all of that, that will happen through our planning commission, through our city process, where there will be more opportunity for additional input from the public in those processes. So that's the tension that I see here is I think we really want to help the public understand this, but also be really clear about what the outlines are and what we can and can't do. And I agree, I don't think we have time to put a technical advisory committee together. So I really like the idea of engaging our existing committees of residents on this through their normally scheduled meetings that we already know are on the books, and try to get them to help us you know, get that engagement and input from them as sort of experts on those committees. So I think that's just the input I wanted to give around kind of the public process for this.
I think we're on the same page. I mean, I think it's not just, there's education about the bill. So for example, I think we're trying to launch our first online educational kind of kickoff in early November. So we're putting materials together. So for example, the mechanics of the bill, the requirements of the bill. These are things it has to do, and the kind of musts and the wills and the shalls. But I think also, you know, how this is from just briefly from the chamber survey. I think in speaking with Katie Brooks, that, you know, how we explain development, why, you know, and the process and the drivers are really important to people, and they can change their opinions about whether something is something seen as an amenity or a good thing, or something that is maybe more uncomfortable. So the fact that this goes to the Common School Fund, for example, is important. So DSL is going to bring some information to explain that. So this isn't just like any other piece of private land. There are some benefits there. And I think also the development process. So this gives us a chance to say, here's where we are with a concept plan, but then there's another step, and you have access to the city council and the adoption of these planning requirements. But then there's the development process, and that could come later. And here's how you would interact with the development process. So we can use it as a chance to explain how people can get involved now, but also going forward. So, safe to go to the next slide here.
Yeah, and I think just keep in mind, Brian, I know that Councilors Keebler and Schenkelberg have a hard stop at 11. So
okay, no, this is the last one. So I just got this yesterday. So this is one of the, you know, again, we're putting it together as quickly as we can here. So I need help on a graphic for a project timeline. But I think this helps kind of explain some of the elements of the project that are scoped that we are going to plan on doing. So kickoff in November, I mentioned that'll be online. We've done a site visit already. So we've walked the property with Division of State Land staff, get a sense of what's going on nearby on the site. really, really good to go out and just feel what's going on in that part of the world. So we'll have a couple open houses, a kickoff. We'll present some of the planned concepts and alternatives after we've done some work, and then we'll have this chance to then, this is task 3. I apologize. At the end of that, we develop concepts. We get to evaluate these concepts with the same model that Andrew Parrish presented to you today on the CSMP. So housing mix, impacts, pros, cons of the different scenarios that would be developed to give people an idea of the impacts and the benefits and the trade-offs with these different concepts. We'll have some technical work on housing and employment that will drive some of those concepts as part of task 4. So housing mix alternatives, market assessments to see what would work out there, what's appropriate. Alternatives evaluation, I had mentioned that in task 5, which is some evaluation metrics and assumptions about different future states. And then we're going to draft this up in task 6, which is just the actual report, that flip book, through March, April, and May. And then we're going to begin the more kind of formal, outside of the project process steps of planning commission work session, city council work session, and hearing. And then Lynn is also going to be working as well on some of these affordable housing issues around conveyance and price per acre. And so we'll be doing that kind of on the side as well. So that's the end of the presentation to hit the timeline, and happy to answer questions.
Great. Thanks, Brian. And you could probably stop sharing. That way you can
Sure.
see the group.
Can't wait to, okay, there we go. Stop share. How's that?
Awesome.
All right. Yeah. Human beings again. I love it. Faces.
Any questions for Brian before we wrap it up?
I just really appreciate that in the graphic, the community engagement goes from beginning all the way to the end. It's a process.
And on that, Counselor, again, there are always constraints, but I would really like to just make myself available to people. I have this strange fantasy about taking a wagon and walking around the neighboring subdivision, just like, hey, do you have questions? Because a lot of those folks may not be online. Just being like, hey, come on, let's have a conversation. So we're doing an online virtual, but we're going to see how far we can stretch that and really just kind of be out there.
Well, there's some parks out there that you could do a more of an in-person, outside, socially distanced thing. I mean, obviously, weather permitting, who knows what will happen in a few months. That could be an option. So people will only have to go like a little bit away from their homes.
I like that.
We'll do a budget adjustment to get you a wagon, Brian.
What a wagon.
With binders. You could have
Binders. Lots of binders.
small binders, like half inch binders. That's the limit.
Okay, so we'll speak with Sharon about the budget adjustment. We'll look for Brian walking along 27th Street with his wagon, and we will go from there. So any final questions on this, Brian? I guess just you'll be back in front of this group pretty routinely as you're working through it. And so obviously plenty of opportunities for input and course corrections as needed or suggestions, but appreciate how quickly you've taken that convoluted bill. And I think you've at least put it into kind of a sequential order of things that need to happen. And June 2022 will be here before we know it. So you'll do a great job of it.
Thank you, John. I wish you could be around to, be here for it, but,
John will be on his new adventure.
Exactly. But we can chat, Brian. I'll look for you in your wagon walking around. Okay, so I believe that was the last item on our agenda. So we're going to adjourn. Haven't heard a second.
Oh, second.
There we go.
I'm going to adjourn by leaving and going to my next meeting.
There you go.
See you there, Melanie.